I want to talk about, how do I say this? I want to talk about mind reading. When people choose not to communicate and expect you to read their minds, or communicate passive aggressively, nonverbal communication, or stonewalling, which is not being responsive. I want to go back to the day my husband confessed his affair to me, and he disclosed it after being caught with the pocket dial while he was on his date. He wound up telling me the woman he was talking to was someone he was having an affair with. We went through that. I wished him luck and just kind of was like, that's fine, we can get a divorce. And then he kind of bartered for, appealed to my emotions and the time spent and the love, and asked if we could work things out. And of course I was considering it because I just got married a few days before and had spent half a decade with this person and really loved him, and was just really hurt and surprised, and couldn't just walk away as easily as I thought I could. I was in it, and we talked, and later that evening, we talked late into the night. Later that evening, he told me there had been another affair. So this is now I'm learning that there was another time that he had stepped out and had an affair on me. He told me the year, and I was like, well, what happened to make you do that? Because of course, if you're doing this discreetly, if these are like specific times where maybe something happened and you stepped out because of whatever, you'd be able to identify that, what the catalyst was for you to feel the need to step out of the relationship. And he wasn't very clear, which at the time kind of made me suspicious, because it's like, well, if this is the only other time you did it, you should be able to know why and what was happening in our lives for you to do that. He should have been able to point to it. So I was already suspicious, but he mentioned some woman. I'd never ever heard of her. Not a friend, and I asked how they met and how they knew each other, and they had worked together at some time when he was doing a summer somewhere when he was in graduate school. And I didn't know what that was. I didn't, but I didn't lash out, but I just was like, I don't understand this, what could have happened that early on in our relationship for you to do that. And then the conversation started shifting. And the conversation shifted to what was the rush? Because I just asked him, I said, why, why did you marry me again? I don't understand why you actually married me if you are having affairs with other people and clearly not, interested in, sex, and, with me, you're doing it with other people, and why did you marry me? I'm just trying to understand that. And he kind of flipped it on me and started asking me what the rush was. And I didn't know how to answer that, because I'm like, the rush, we've been together for 5 years. There's no rush. There's, we've been living together for 4.5 years. Where's the rush? This is not, if anything, it was a very long period of time, and we hadn't broken up that entire time. It wasn't an on again, off again relationship. We were in a steady, committed, well, at least I was committed to the relationship for half a decade, or almost half a decade, because we dated and then made it official. So I was really having a hard time processing this concept and understanding how rush and years could be in the same sentence. And then he started it was just that feeling of like, mind you, this is like hours after he's just like confessed to like a really bad thing. And then he starts kind of putting me on the stand. Like I need to account for my feelings, and I need to tell him what the rush was. And I need to, understand, he needed to understand why I needed to get married. And and then he was like, I felt pressure in this relationship. And I was like, why did you feel pressure? Like, I don't understand. Like, I never, the reason why this lasted so long, like, I'm a woman in my 30s. Like, if I was so pressed for things to move quickly, I wouldn't have stayed in this relationship with just you this whole time. I would have had my little timeline and moved on if you didn't meet my criteria, if I was that, strict about what my timelines and my goals were. So it just wasn't making sense. And I was bothered because I was like, you could have just said something to me. And then he starts saying, well, you wanted kids, and like, how, like, what did I say? Like, how did I respond when you talked about kids? And I was trying to go back into my memory bank, and I was like, how did he respond? And I'm like, there was no noticeable response that I was aware of that was neither negative or positive. It was just, the discussions you have with your partner about wants and needs and plans. And I go, I don't remember there was no reaction, which is a fair thing to say. I don't recall a reaction. And he goes, exactly, there was no reaction. And I'm like, okay, am I supposed to read into that? And he's like, well, and I was like, we talked about children so many times, over the course of our relationship. We talked about marriage and children and goals. Like, you don't go into relationships if you want to be responsible and get your needs met. I know I wasn't going to go into a relationship blindly and not have those discussions early on and continuously over the course of our relationship. Not like incessantly, like I wasn't like, there wasn't this need to always have these conversations, but there would be these periodic check-ins to make sure we were still on the same page and still wanted the same things. And I would very clearly ask him, do you want children? Because, those are questions, right? And if he didn't, like, I was actually prepared to not have children if I had the partner I wanted. Like, that to me was a good compromise. If I had my life partner and companion, like, I could go without children if he really felt strongly. He didn't feel strongly about not having children. And he would always say yes. And then I would also take it one step further and say, do you want children with me? Right? Just in case, like, because things were just like, we were living together, and, we'd been around a lot of his nieces and nephews and mine as well. And we were around children and people, friends' children, and people were starting to have children and get married. And, you want to have these conversations, right? Because that's what you do when you have an adult grown-up relationship. You talk about things and you discuss your needs and wants and expectations. So he would always say, yes, with you. I'd love to have a family with you. And, we didn't go as far, into like naming kids, but we did talk about what, that their names would have meaning. And, we had these conversations. And it was really odd when he said this comment about, well, that's right, I didn't respond. Like, I wasn't excited, was I? And I'm like, no, but, I actually don't know very many men that are excited about the prospect of having children. I think it's just part of, and I was just like kind of thinking about it. I was like, I'm sorry, was I supposed to notice something? Because I didn't, you were neutral. We talked about children, but you didn't give a strong sense of like, you definitely didn't say you didn't want them. And he goes, exactly, but I didn't say I wanted them. And I'm like, you did. And he said, no, I said I could have children. I would. And I'm like, that's not the same thing. I don't understand. Like, so now we start doing the semantics and the wordplay and and then he started making up this thing about my timeline and how I wanted to have children quickly, right? And I'm like, no, I never said that. And he's like, well, you're this age, so, you obviously want to start early, like soon. I go, I never said that. But you've known my age this entire time. So if that was a concern to you, you could have said something if you felt you were pressured by that. But you've never brought that up, So I'm not trying to have a baby right now. I have not, we obviously were not having sex for quite some time. So that wasn't even possible. So I was just trying to figure out what he was talking about. And, he wasn't, and then he said to me, well, we weren't having sex, we weren't having sex. And I told you, before we got married, right the night before we got married, that we had issues. And I'm like, but everyone has issues. Like, I don't understand what the issues you're talking about are that are problematic, and he's like, well, we weren't having sex. And there was this, the language used, it wasn't that we weren't having sex. It was that he wasn't having sex with me. He was having sex. He just wasn't having it with me. And I wasn't having sex because my partner wasn't having sex with me. But he kept using we as if this was our doing when it was in fact his doing. And that's a part of the lack of accountability, the not owning the fact that he was the cause of this, not me. And this had come up in therapy earlier in the year, not so much as an issue that I'd elevated, because again, to me, sex was not a major part of my relationship with him or a major need in my own personal hierarchy of needs. So I never made sex very important. I liked companionship. I liked spending time. I liked really intelligent conversations and having common goals, sharing common values, spending time with family. Those were the things that I valued and enjoyed in our relationship. It wasn't about sex. And so the lack of sex wasn't a problem for me, because if it had been a problem for me, I would have left the relationship, and I certainly would not have married him if it were a major problem for me. I know that about myself. It just didn't make sense. And so he brought this up as if this were a major problem for him. And so I'm sitting here looking at him then why did you get married? Because when you brought it up in therapy and said you were concerned that I would have a sexless marriage, which was kind of cryptic, right? Because he knew that he did not intend to ever have sex with me again, and that he intended to have sex with everybody else but me. But he still wanted to marry me, but he still wanted to throw that in there so that he was able to say, presumably, I told you we were not going to have sex, so you knew this. I remember him bringing that up as one of the issues and concerns, and I kind of was like, I think that can be fixed. I think we just have to, when we get there, when we start talking about it and trying to figure that out, we can talk about it, but I'm less concerned with that, so I don't want you to feel like that's an issue, because I really didn't know what I was dealing with. I didn't know if he had, low testosterone. I had asked him to get tested maybe to see if maybe that was the cause. I was just trying to look at it from a very empathetic, compassionate lens, because I didn't want to make the assumption that all men just like sex, and if you don't like sex, there's something wrong with you, because I was dealing with my own feelings towards sex that people probably didn't understand, that it was like dessert for me. You can take it or leave it. I, didn't necessarily have a craving for it, but if it was put in front of me, I would eat it. And I could appreciate the flavor and the richness and stuff, but I also can say, no, it wasn't good or whatever. So that's how sex was for me. And so I understood that people's relationships with sex vary, and it's okay. The same way I could understand someone being bisexual or gay or trans. These are things that you don't have to feel that way to understand it. And so I understood that sex for him was something complicated. I didn't know it was about me and him, but because he had mentioned that this had happened in other relationships. So I wanted to be sensitive to that, and also to show I'm not here for the sex. That let's just throw that out as an issue for us. That's not our issue. If it's an issue if it